Hello and welcome back to United in Action. My name is Steve Chiu and I'm delighted to be your host. I'm joining you here once again in Boston, Massachusetts at the historic Tsuji Service Center, where we'll be having conversation with Kelly Moltzen, who is a convener of the Interfaith Public Health Network, Rockefeller Food Systems Fellow, and one of our co-organizers of the Holistic Climate Solutions Summit. Together, we'll be exploring the key roles that faith values plays in transforming our food systems in an equitable and just manner, while also looking at what solutions faith-based organizations can be taking to ensure that we create food systems that are equitable for all. Now let's come on inside and meet Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Steve.
You're such a wealth of information, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us to share about all of this great work that is happening in the food system space. I'd love to maybe hold space for you to first introduce yourself to our audience. Who are you? Why are you so committed to food systems transformation? And what's this experience that you bring to us today?
Thanks. So my name is Kelly Moltzen. I have been working in the food and nutrition space for over 12 years. And I basically, I studied nutrition as an undergrad student in college and, started questioning the science is all out there, healthy food keeps people healthy and this fruits, vegetables, these are the types of things that are healthy. And, if everyone knew this information, then we wouldn't have all these health disparities. So I started digging more in and I studied public health in grad school and started learning more about health disparities and then found an organization that would help me address those health disparities and started working to address them, got more involved with food justice. And it was really a call from my faith background. I grew up Catholic, especially in the Franciscan tradition, which tells us to prioritize the needs of the poor and marginalized. And knowing about the health disparities and the food injustices impacting these communities, it really made me passionate about addressing food justice issues. And the more I started looking at the connections between my faith and food justice, the more I started seeing that there's a lot of overlap, that food connects us back to the land, that if you look at food through a spiritual lens, it has a huge amount of potential. And so I also find a lot of inspiration from Thich Nhat Hanh and how he talks about food and how food, shows us how we're all interconnected with one another and the rest of the world. And so I just really feel that taking a faith approach to food, we can really inspire and mobilize more people to be addressing food justice issues throughout the world.
I love that. And as one of the founding members of our Faith and Food Coalition, it's been so cool to see this flourishing that has come forth by marrying your faith backgrounds, your passions and interests, and being able to come into our space with such a wealth of knowledge that you've already built up in these 12 years. And so would love to reflect with you, with the work that we've been doing with the Faith and Food Coalition, we recognize that faith values really are at the center and heart of food system transformations. And so could you name some of those values and lift that up for us in this space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first one that I think is just so important is interconnectedness and interdependence. So we are all connected with one another and the earth, and that's really important to recognize. Another one is truth. So science and faith are not at odds. And they actually complement each other, which I think eco-spirituality has so much to teach us in that regard. Another one is reverence. So reverence for the earth and the food as sacred, and recognizing the need to reconnect our rituals to the sacredness of the food and the earth. Another one is respect. So respecting the indigenous wisdom that they have around the earth and how should we co-inhabit the earth with one another and other living creatures. And then we have compassion, which is about centering and uplifting the marginalized. And we have solidarity, so seeing that we are all one human family and recognizing the importance and need of working together. And then the last one is empowerment. So resilience lies within ourselves, within our communities, our ecosystems, and our faith traditions.
I think it's so beautiful in all of these values that you just lifted up. They're all sort of immaterial, right? They're things that tie us together and bind us together, and they lie at the heart of our actions, right? And so knowing you for who you are and the wealth of knowledge that you have in the work that different faith traditions have been doing, whether that's through your Interfaith Public Health Network background or just this passion that you have and have been growing this knowledge base over the years, would love to hear you reflect with us, like, what are some of the works that faith-based organizations are already doing at the front lines to transform these food systems? Like, what's already happening?
Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite examples is with the Black Church Food Security Network, as they are looking at their own communities to see, we have Black farmers who are growing food and they need a market, and then you have Black churches and they need access to healthy food. So they're connecting the dots together to make sure that their farmers are being supported with the markets and that their communities are able to access fresh food. And this is especially, they started their work within food swamp areas, we'll call it, of unhealthy foods in Baltimore. So they're able to make that connection. They've really grown throughout the region. Another example is within the indigenous community, the Dene Nation. They created a junk food tax. So they're really stepping up in promoting food sovereignty because they're looking at how they can basically just grow more food on their land and not have to rely on junk food being, given to them on their reservation. So they're trying to making it a little bit harder for people to access the junk foods because they want people to eat the healthy foods that they're able to grow themselves. And then we have faith leaders that are working to try and reduce the availability and promotion of unhealthy foods. So like in fast food restaurants, making sure that there's healthy options available for kids and that those are being promoted. And then one thing that we've done with the Interfaith Public Health Network is also mobilizing faith leaders to promote sugar warning labels in New York City chain restaurants. And so that's another way we can just raise more consumer awareness about what's healthy and what's not healthy to help people make better choices. There's also just work in general to promote more food sovereignty. It's a conversation that I had recently with a group of Jesuits I was in Kenya for my food systems fellowship, and just talking about how we can promote more food sovereignty. Oh, also Catholic Rural Life. They do a lot in promoting what is a faith response to promoting environment and food together. So I think that's important when we're thinking about how are we growing our food and what are the faith values that are inspiring us to grow food in ways that are organic and sustainable and nourishing and regenerative. Another thing that we've done is a program called Mindful Eating for the Beloved Community, which is really connecting the dots between mindful eating and food systems changes that we can be making in our community. So those are some of the things that I've seen and been involved in that I find to be exciting at the intersection of food and faith.
For sure. And I love that in each one of these things, we're seeing how faith and faith values inspire us to take actions in ways that align with our belief systems, with our values, and change culture, right? Like we connect dots between potentially siloed spaces and say that there's co-benefits of collaborating, right? Like we create positive barriers to prevent access to things that are dangerous to our communities and advocate and champion for changes of alternatives that really can usher in this new wave of health and co-benefits to our own lifestyles, our well-beings. And I love that you're lifting up in all of this, that there is this underlying current of values, right? And so I'd love to maybe also explore with you, recognizing that faith is at the forefront of food systems transformation. The work that we're doing right now may not necessarily be enough to get us to where we need to be or where we want to be in the future, right? So there's still a lot of opportunity, there's still a lot of potential. And from your landscape and viewpoint, what else can faith-based traditions be doing to accelerate food system transformation in an equitable and just way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I think we could be doing more of is recognizing the importance of, especially in communities that are consuming too much meat, to be reducing our meat consumption. There's a term called reducitarianism that's about consciously reducing our consumption of animal products because we recognize the benefits for health and the environment. So I think as we practice more mindful eating, we can think about, where's the food that we're eating coming from, and what was the impact on the environment, on animals, on human health, on the workers and how they're treated. So all of these things can go into our food choices. So definitely thinking more about being more conscientious and reducing consumption of animal products. Also, there's these three components that I know the Rockefeller Foundation is focusing on that I think they hold a lot of potential. One is around changing procurement of institutions. So there's a program called the Good Food Purchasing Program that cities around the US have been adopting that basically means that you're putting ethical values at the forefront of how government institutions are purchasing food, which has a potential to have really big impact. So we're looking at food that's more sustainable, nutritious, you're taking animal welfare into account, how, the working conditions and wages of workers. Yeah, like all of these different components that we can really be considering when we're looking at our food that is being purchased by large institutions. Another one is integrating more food as medicine. And how are we helping to promote that as faith communities, recognizing that, our food really should be the way that we are primarily approaching disease, that we can prevent a lot of disease through taking a look at the food we're eating, and that should be incorporated more into healthcare institutions. And then also true cost accounting, which is about recognizing the full cost of our food choices, because junk food might be cheap when you look at it, at the cost in the supermarket. But then you look at what are all of the costs along the entire supply chain and who was impacted along that way. And if everybody were paid the way that they should be paid along that supply chain, what would the actual cost of the food be if it wasn't subsidized by governments and all that sort of thing? So, how the faith community can get behind more of those topics, I think would be really interesting. Also, there's a movement called the Just Livestock Transition, which is about seeing how we can transition more farmers that are doing animal agriculture, especially in unsustainable ways, and help support them in finding ways to do more sustainable agriculture. So yeah, those are some of the different things I think that we can be doing more of.
Yeah, I love that in your reflections on where we are headed and where the opportunity is. A lot of it is centered around culture change, whether it's the culture of what we consume to the culture of how we treat each other and how we account for externalities and costs. There's this large underlying foundation of we recognize that the systems we exist in are broken or partially broken, right? And as faith-based organizations coming into this space to say that we have a more holistic view, right? And that there is opportunity here if we listen to our intrinsic wisdom, right? Yeah. And we're more mindful about what we consume, how we consume, and the impacts of our consumption, that we can really build these better societies, not just for us as consumers, right? But for the laborers, for the animals, for the environments that we grow all this food in, right? And so maybe before we jump into the next question, what can we do to facilitate this sense of mindfulness, right? Is it just simply we need to slow down as a society to take more into account? Is it that we need more data to really see the damages that we're creating in our environments? Do you have a sense of what does it require for us to slow down in order to take account of how we change this culture?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We can start by being more mindful about our food choices and recognizing that not everyone has the same privilege to have those choices. And that's what I like about this concept of mindful eating for the beloved community. It's about recognizing that certain communities, the beloved community was what was really promoted by Martin Luther King Jr. So as Martin Luther King said, of all of the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most inhumane. So if we look at that and we look at the role that food plays in healthcare and in health inequalities, then we can see that there are certain communities that are more impacted by not only health disparities, but poverty, income inequality, access to good quality education, parents may be working, they might be too busy to be preparing food. So there's a lot of issues that make it more difficult for certain communities to be able to make better food choices. But there are things that we can be doing in solidarity together to make sure that those communities do have the options that they need to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And so, when we think about what else we can be doing, it's about mindfulness. It's about recognizing what privileges that we have, that we can be making better choices and vote with our fork. And then what are challenges that other communities are facing that make it more difficult for them to make more healthy and sustainable choices. So to me, it's about that balance of awareness about what our own personal choices are, and what kind of choices other people are limited in being able to make for themselves.
Right. It's beautiful, Kelly. I think there's this paradigm of awareness and action, right? And then within communities that may be struggling a little more and don't necessarily have they have time poverty issues, right? Or there's barriers that prevent them living in food deserts where they can't access healthy foods, right? I love that we're coming at this from a privileged lens to say, if we have the privilege of being able to be mindful and having these choices, that we make those choices. But then if we're existing in communities or we're working with communities hand in hand that don't have those privileges, to build the infrastructure to make the healthy choice the easy choice, right? And I think it also comes to this notion that we've spoken about multiple times on this series around this notion of othering, right? And how our society as of right now sees different pockets of communities that are in suffering or that are in plights as other, and that as long as we take care of our own people, everyone else can suffer, right? And for us to come together in this way and say that as faith-based organization, there is no other. We're deeply interdependent, like you lifted up in the values before. This mission is not just to help you and me get better food, but to ensure that everyone living on this planet has that equal access and right to a good food system.
Yeah, and to that point around othering and community, whether or not we're already in community with those who are, struggling, we should make the effort to build those bridges, because that's what it's about, to build solidarity and to make sure that we're not othering, is that we are in community with one another, and that that's what, again, mindful eating for the beloved community, coming together around a meal and sharing those experiences and getting to know people that we are not as familiar with from our own communities.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of courage, right? To say you step into a space that you're uncomfortable or unfamiliar with, but the rewards that you reap are tremendous, right? And so definitely right there with you and encouraging our communities to reach out beyond their comfort zones and meet our neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Be in spaces of slight unfamiliarity and hear how other people are living their lives. I love that so much, Kelly. And so maybe coming back to beyond just what faith can do and what we have the opportunity to do, right? There's also this broader space of other food systems actors and leaders that are really thinking on the cutting edge of food systems transformation. And I'd love to hear from your experience with the Rockefeller Food Systems Fellowship, what else is happening within the food systems transformation space? Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, so it's very inspiring. I've been part of this cohort with 20 other food systems fellows from across the world, and they're doing all different types of projects, from creating apps that help to reduce food waste and make sure that food that is in excess is getting donated or is made available to people who need it. There's work being done with indigenous communities, like I mentioned earlier, around promoting more food sovereignty. There's work being done with youth to raise awareness about the harms of junk food marketing and helping to hold corporations accountable to that marketing, to make sure that the marketing can be reduced, that people aren't being bombarded with all these ads for unhealthy foods and beverages. Some of the other things are around impact investing. That's something that Acumen is very involved in supporting small farmers, making sure that farmers have access to markets, that they're, especially those that are, we're the small farmers and those that we're promoting and doing more ethical growing practices, that they're able to sell their products and get good wages for that as well. And creating ethical supply chains and making sure that consumers are aware of the nutrition of the foods that they're eating, especially ultra processed foods, and what are the harms of the products within those packages, within those foods. So yeah, all different types of ways to think about being more creative in how we are tackling food systems issues.
Yeah, I love also in hearing these emergent solutions in the food systems, what we're seeing is this interconnectedness, right? That we're not just siloed to just farmers alone, but there's businesses and corporations that are coming in with ethical investing that goes to farmers that are making ethical choices, right? And like in each one of these spaces, it seems like values kind of like underpins this all, right? And that like we bring together these different sectors, we bring together these different markets in a way to say that everyone has a role to play in shaping our future food systems.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone has a role to play. And, you know, the greatest thing that I think is possible about the food systems work, especially from a faith perspective, is that we are being co-creators with God in creating the world that we want to see.
Yeah, I love this notion of like really having the agency to even co-create, right? To say that like our future is not in the hands of mysterious entities and systems that are at play, but that we ourselves are actively shaping this world that we wish to live in. Would love to close out our conversation with maybe calls to actions. Looking forward, it's such an interesting moment, right? Like COP27 and the food systems work has been something that has been like rising within the climate space, right? We're also seeing like food systems transformation become even more of a priority because of this ongoing conflict with Ukraine and Russia, where we see how fragile our food environments really are, right? And how interdependent we are. And so I think food is at the forefront of everyone's mind as our population continues to grow. This narrative between food security and food sovereignty is very much like in play. And so there's a lot that the future awaits for us to answer, right? And so from your side and your like purview, what's the calls to action? How can we both as organizations and individuals take action to help move our food systems in the right direction in a way that's aligned with these values that you so eloquently spoke of earlier?
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is that, like you said, it's both something that we can do personally as well as organizations. If we start within ourselves, you know, we can think about what we can do within our own spiritual and personal transformation to make changes to our eating habits. We can think about what we can do within our own communities. You know, in the environment around us, you know, we're part of a church or we're part of a school, you know, they all are getting food from different places that are being served to the community, you know, and what's the supply chain of that food and digging deeper into it. And then looking at larger policy issues. You know, these are all things that we can be doing both as individuals as well as in communities. You know, the more questions that we ask, the deeper down that we dig into the issues. And yeah, I mean, there's also conversations happening both at the national level in the US as well as globally around food systems. You know, this just last month was the first time in 50 years that the White House had a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And so, you know, the follow-up to this with the Good Food Dialogues is really an opportunity to get involved with, you know, creating the food system that we want to see. And then also with the UN Food System Summit being last year and how our Faith and Food Coalition has been involved and continues to be involved, we're also involved with the conversations at the global level. So I would say that for anybody listening could really, you know, get in touch with us and just think about what role that they want to see both in their own communities as well as globally. And maybe there's ways that we can collaborate together.
I love that. A call to co-creation,
Exactly.
right? And I think it's so true. Like, as we ask these questions, we begin to dig deeper into perhaps some of these more invisible things, right? Like does our food flow from? Where within our community is food being distributed? And then where is that food going,
Yeah.
right? And recognizing that all of these things flowing in between aren't without like human beings in the mix. It's really the question of like, who is at the epicenter of each one of these steps? And like, what relationship do we have with each one of these people, right?
Yeah, it's like what Kathleen Merrigan said when she was at the USDA is know your farmer, know your food.
Ooh.
You know, food is just such a way of connecting with one another and, you know, getting to know each other more intimately, both around the table as well as if you get to know your farmer and where the food is coming from. So yeah, it's really just like a a really magical thing, how food connects us to one another in the earth.
Oh, I love that. I'm so grateful that you're here with us, Kelly, and for all of your wisdom. I think in this conversation, not only are we learning about how faith and food deeply intersect, the opportunities that we have in transforming our food systems, but really coming back to such a personal thing, right? Which is that food connects us all and we're really here together. And the more we're able to share, be in community together with each other, the brighter our future is together.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much, Kelly, for being with us for United in Action.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's been such a treat to have your expertise, your wisdom, and all of these lovely solutions that we can be taking right now. With this, we will look forward to welcoming you to our next episode, and thanks so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.